Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our virtual patchwork worship service. I'm going to give just a minute here for everyone to join in. So just come on in, and we'll get started here shortly. Just setting up my phone so that I can see the comments here. So welcome to worship. This is Patchwork Central's virtual worship space, time, thing, and we're so glad that you're joining with us. So please feel free to let us know that you're here. Say hello, say your name, whatever you wish in the comments section. So tonight we're going to be continuing my series that I'm doing on the plagues in Revelation, and it sounds very doom and gloom and horrible, but it's actually not that bad. And it's actually not what a lot of people think Revelation is as a book and as a spiritual text. So we'll be talking about that in a little bit. And if you were here last week, you got the flavor of what we're doing when we started that out last Sunday. But the first thing that we do when we gather for worship, even when we do it not in person, is to say our names. So I invite you, wherever you are, to say your name aloud, or to type it into the comments, or both, and to feel that we have been bound together spiritually, that we are together, if not physically, definitely in spirit, and as a community. So please go ahead and do that now. And I'll see, so we've got Helen, Darlene. I'm sure we have a few more. The next thing that we usually do is ask for celebrations. Are there birthdays or anniversaries coming up this week that we should celebrate? I know of one that I saw on the calendar. This coming Friday, the 19th, is Darlene Blagg's birthday, Darlene's birthday. So big birthday for someone who's so important to our community, and so we wish Darlene a very happy birthday. Also, on the very same day, this Friday, is the celebration of Juneteenth. That is when African Americans in this country celebrate freedom from slavery. It's a big celebration and holiday for that. So, are there other birthdays or anniversaries or celebrations to lift up? All right, as again, I'm just checking the comments section to see if anybody has written anything in yet. Don't see anything quite yet. As things pop up, though, I'll go back to them. So those are our celebrations for the folks in our community. Our text this evening is going to be a continuation. So last week, we talked about Revelation chapter 15, verses 1 through 4, and we talked about how this was an introduction to this big scene of plagues. And I said that the book of Revelation is absolutely not to be taken literally. It is not about trying to predict events thousands of years into the future from when it was written into our day. It's not telling us anything about COVID-19 or about the Middle East in terms of its politics for today. It's not telling us any of that stuff. It is a spiritual text written by and for an oppressed religious minority in first century Roman Empire times. So it is full of imagery from that time in the Roman Empire. It is full of imagery from the Hebrew Bible. The writer of the book of Revelation was steeped in the imagery of the Hebrew Bible, especially in the story of the Exodus and in prophets like Ezekiel. And again, we'll talk about this more as we go along. But it also has this very dreamlike quality. There are these dreamlike images and portents and things that need to be interpreted. There's a code language. One code is gematria, and that's where you assign numbers to the different letters in the alphabet, and you spell out a name or a word, and you give the sum. And so that famous number 666 that is supposedly identified with Satan or the beast, and some people see modern day 666 and have all kinds of conspiracy theories about it. What it really was assigning numbers to the letters in the Hebrew alphabet and spelling out the name Nero Caesar. So it was absolutely referring to that particular Caesar, but of course in a larger sense to all of the Caesars and to the state of the Roman Empire in general, and to the oppression and injustice of that empire. So that's just one example. You can go back and see the video from last week. This week is the continuation. So we're going to continue with Revelation chapter 15, verses 5 through 8. And here is that passage. After this I looked, and the temple of the tent of witness in heaven was opened, and out of the temple came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, robed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes across their chests. Then one of the 4 living creatures gave the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from God's power, and no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were ended. So, kind of shocking, a little bit disturbing, a little bit weird, but don't worry, we'll go through it. So as I mentioned, the author of this book and the visions that he's having, he is just soaked in the imagery of the Hebrew Bible and especially the story of the Exodus. So here's a section from Exodus chapter 19, verses 16 through 20, and listen for the common elements with that vision of Revelation that I just read. On the morning of the 3rd day, there was thunder and lightning, as well as a thick cloud on the mountain, and a blast of a trumpet so loud that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, while the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses would speak, and God would answer him in thunder. When the Lord descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. So notice that in this scene, there is also a mountain, a trumpet blast. Now, this wasn't in the particular section from Revelation I just read, but there are trumpet blasts in Revelation, and that's a big part of the imagery. Earthquakes, again, not in this particular scene, but in the rest of Revelation. The presence of God in fire and smoke, and that smoke is going to be very important a little later on. Now, the other thing that's in common here is when Moses goes up to the mountain to meet with God, to be face to face with God, God starts by imparting the law to Moses, the Torah. And among the first things that God tells Moses is that the people are to build him a tabernacle, a holy tent, which is a mobile temple. It's a place where the presence of God can dwell among the people while the people are in the wilderness and moving around. It's not a one fixed building. It is a tent that acts as a dwelling place, a reminder of God's presence among the people. Now, another image, though, that may kind of cross over and overlap, like I said, this is very dreamlike. The metaphors are not crystal clear as to what means what. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of different stuff going on. So the other thing about this witness of the heavenly temple that is also a tent, a tabernacle, is that in Rome, there was a temple to a god named Janus. And Janus was a two-faced god, and Janus was god of both boundaries and beginnings. And as the god himself had two faces, the temple of Janus had two sets of gates, in the front of the temple and in the rear of the temple. And it was customary in Rome that in times of peace, both sets of gates would be closed. But in times of war, both sets of gates would be left wide open. So it is fitting that in John's vision, as the angels bring bowls of God's wrath to unleash on the beast, the Roman Empire, the heavenly temple of the tent of witness is wide open, because God has declared a sort of spiritual war of good versus evil, of justice versus injustice. And this is an important point. So this temple is a metaphor both for the tabernacle, the dwelling of God's presence, but it is also an echo of this temple of Janus in Rome, and it is subverting Roman imagery and metaphor for the purposes of God's spiritual message to God's people about justice and injustice and good versus evil. So these seven angels fly forth from this heavenly tabernacle, and it says that they are robed in pure, bright linen. Now, the pure linen part would have been the clothing of priests as they tended the holy fire in the altar of the temple. You can find this in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 10. But that word bright, so not only is it pure linen, it is bright. And in Greek, that word is lampres. And it is curious because that word only appears a very few times in the entire New Testament. And two of the main times it appears is once in Luke and once in Acts. And remember that the books of Luke and Acts are by the same author. And so these two other uses of lampres, bright, must be connected. And I imagine that this use of lampres in Revelation is possibly connected to these passages in Luke and Acts as well. So I'll tell you, the first use is in the Gospel of Luke toward the end of the Gospel, and it is used to describe the robe that Herod's soldiers put on Jesus as they mock him before his execution. So that robe that they put on him to mock him and call him King of the Jews and say, oh, you're the Messiah, ha ha ha, that robe is lampres, it is bright. The other use of it is in Acts chapter 10, verse 30, where an angel appears to the Roman centurion Cornelius in the city of Joppa. Oh, no, he isn't in Joppa, but he is told to send to Joppa and to have Simon Peter brought to his house. Peter, the disciple of Jesus, of course. So Peter is having his famous vision of this large sheet that is descending from heaven with all kinds of animals on it, clean and unclean. And there's a heavenly voice telling Peter to get up and kill and eat. And it is this vision about radical inclusivity, radical diversity within God's kingdom, that God finds all people holy, not just Jewish people, but Gentiles as well. This robe that the angel wears to appear to Cornelius, a Roman centurion, and tell him to send to Joppa and to have this Jewish man come and stay at his house, while this Jewish man is having a heavenly vision of radical diversity and inclusion, is also that lampres, that bright. So next, the angels are described as wearing a golden sash across their chests. And this is a bit misleading. When we hear about a golden sash across the chest, we probably think of some fancy ceremonial dress, something that an aristocrat would wear, or the winner of a beauty pageant, something like that. But here, the word that's translated sash in Greek is zonas, which doesn't exactly mean a ceremonial sash. It can mean a girdle or a belt or a waistband. And the verb here is not just simply wear it as in to, kind of throw it over your shoulder or throw it around your chest. The verb in Greek is periodosmenoi, and it's a very specific verb meaning to dress or prepare for active work or travel. So this is girding up clothing to prepare yourself to do hard labor or to go on the road and do some hard traveling for a long period of time. So these were not ceremonial golden sashes that these angels were wearing. These were work clothes. These were things that the angels were wearing because they had a long journey and a lot of hard work to do because they were tasked with doing the work of God's justice, God's wrath against evil and injustice and the empire. Wearing these ceremonial robes and ceremonial sashes to look pretty, they were gearing up to do some hard work. And then it says, one of the four living creatures. Now, this refers back to earlier in the book of Revelation. The four living creatures are characters from earlier in the vision. And it's described this way. Around the throne and on each side of the throne are four living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with a face like a human face, and the fourth living creature like a flying eagle. And the four living creatures, each of All right. Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties, so we had to stop and restart it here. So I'll give everybody a chance to kind of get back on the feed. So I'm just going to check my phone. All right. Part 2, there we go. All right. We've got a couple more eyes here. All right. Okay. So I think we stopped. I was talking about the four living creatures. I won't read that whole section from Revelation again, but I'll just talk about that rabbinic tradition. So the rabbinic tradition is that the greatest of all wild animals was the lion, the greatest of all domesticated animals was the ox, the greatest of all birds was the eagle, and the pinnacle, the greatest of all creatures created by God, is humankind. And so taken together, this was a metaphor for saying all life on earth, all created things. And so in this vision, it is one of these four creatures, although it's not specified which one, and I think that's intentional because this one creature is still meant to stand in for, metaphorically, all life on earth, all the creatures that God has created. So this creature, one of the four creatures, gives the bowls of wrath, bowls of God's wrath to the seven angels for them to go forth and do the work of God's justice. And I think that John's vision is getting at this sense, this feeling that all of creation works together for God's justice. It's not just human beings, it's all creation. And I think in our modern day, we can see this in some ways, in some limited ways, in some certain ways that the earth fights back against injustice. When there is pollution, when there is, carbon emissions, when there are so many things that despoil the earth and the creatures and the ecosystems that cause life to flourish, the earth fights back. The earth fights back against that injustice, and we are meant to be part of fighting that injustice, and we are meant to be linking together arm in arm and hoof in hoof and claw in claw and wing in wing with all of creation to fight this injustice. And there's more, not in this particular section of Revelation, but there will be more about how the Roman Empire and this imperial state of mind, this imperial way of living, is a way that commodifies creation, a way that simply looks at creation as how do we extract as much wealth out of it as we can, and does not see creation as a thing to be enjoyed in and of itself, does not see creation as interdependence, does not see creation as a good in itself, but only something to be taken advantage of. And certainly that Roman Empire mindset is still rampant today in other empires and places across the world where human beings still want to take advantage of nature and creation rather than try to live more harmoniously with it. So that's one of the messages of this book of Revelation. So finally, at least in this part of the vision, we get the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from God's power, and no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were ended. So remember that passage from Exodus that I quoted earlier, where the smoke and the cloud were indications of God's presence and God's glory. The smoke, in addition to being an indication of God's glory, is also a barrier. Remember that the smoke surrounds the mountain, Mount Sinai, and the people are not allowed to go past the smoke. Only Moses is allowed to go up the mountain. So this smoke is a reminder of God's presence and God's glory, but it is also a barrier showing that we are not God and we are not divine. We are not all-powerful. We are human beings and we need to keep our place. And then the other dimension of the metaphor of this smoke is that the smoke is, in addition to God's glory and God's presence, is indicative of God's wrath at injustice, God's work of working against evil in the world. And notice that it says that no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were ended. So this God's wrath, this smoke, it doesn't last forever. And that's another one of the big messages of the book of Revelation, is that, yes, God is wrathful. God is angry at injustice. God is angry at evil. And God actively works in the world to fight injustice and evil and oppression. But God's work of justice will not last forever. Evil will be defeated. And that's what we talked about last time, is the victory is assured. There will be a time of peace. There will be a time of justice. And so when it says that no one was allowed to enter the holy temple until after these plagues were ended, that means God's wrath has an expiration date, but God's love does not. God's love, God's communion with us will be eternal and will last forever. And that's a big message throughout the book of Revelation. Another vision of God's smoky presence, just to kind of give you another little taste of it, is from the prophet Isaiah chapter 4, verses 5 through 6. Then the Lord will create over the whole site of Mount Zion and over its places of assembly a cloud by day and smoke and the shining of a flame fire by night. Indeed, over all the glory there will be a canopy. It will serve as a pavilion, a shade by day from the heat, and a refuge and a shelter from the storm and rain. So here Isaiah is giving a vision of the restored Jerusalem that includes a smoke or a cloud and this canopy that is also an image of God's protection of God's people. So this smoke has so many dimensions and so many metaphors swirling around. So in John's vision, the smoke is sign and barrier. It is warning and glory. It is all of these things. So to end this particular word section, I want to invite you to just relax wherever you are. And I'm going to kind of guide you through some visioning based on what we've just read. So I invite you to relax, breathe slowly, do whatever it is that you do to get into a frame of mind, frame of spirit that brings you feeling closer to God. And then as I go through these things, I'm going to be asking you questions about things that you might see or things that might pop into your mind. It's okay, you don't have to think too hard about them. Just let the visions pop into your mind. If nothing pops into mind, don't worry, go on to the next thing. But if you do feel like sharing whatever pops into your head as I do this kind of guided meditation vision exercise, please feel free to write it down in the comments section so that we can all kind of share each other's visions for what this is sparking in us. So to start, like I said, this passage started with this image of a holy temple, a tent of the tabernacle in heaven. So I want you to imagine what for you is a heavenly or holy sanctuary? What does it look like? What is a place that you might feel the intimate presence of God near you? Just imagine that place. And if you wish to share, please do so. So now imagine you've imagined your holy sanctuary, your holy temple or tabernacle, whatever it looks like for you. Now imagine angels flying out from that holy temple. And those angels are dressed for work and hard travel with golden items of clothing that not sashes. Think of what would you think of when you think of getting prepared to go on a long journey or getting prepared to do hard work. Are these angels wearing golden work boots? Are they wearing golden overalls? Golden medical scrubs? What is it? What golden clothing are these angels wearing that indicates that they are ready for travel and hard work for doing God's justice in the world? So go ahead and let that spark in your mind and see what vision that brings up. Now envision a living creature that somehow embodies or represents all life, the biome of Earth. And what does this living creature look like? It can be a mishmash of animal parts or plants or whatever in your vision indicates that it represents all life interdependently interwoven on Earth. What does your vision of the living creature look like? Okay, so now imagine that living creature, whatever it looks like, giving the bowls of God's justice to these hardworking angels in their golden work clothes. And what do these bowls represent to you? What is the work of God's justice in the world? Is it the work of environmental justice, of racial justice, of defunding the police, of justice for our LGBTQ siblings? Because even this past week, the injustice against our lesbian, gay, queer, transgender, bisexual siblings was ratcheted up because the administration decided that the Affordable Care Act would no longer cover them with equal protections under the law. Healthcare justice, economic justice. What are these bowls fighting the empire for? To create not just a peace that is an absence of tension, a complacency, a comfort, but a peace that is full of justice, a peace that is full of right relationship in society. What are those bowls for you? And finally, imagine that smoke. We talked a lot about that smoke imagery, that smoke filling that heavenly sanctuary of your vision. What kind of smoke is it that would fill, that would represent God's presence, God's glory, God's wrath, that would also represent a barrier for humankind? What kind of smoke would fill your holy sanctuary, your tabernacle? What kind of smoke is temporary, is in the world now, but one day will be gone, and will allow you and me and everyone and every living thing on earth to enter that holy of holies and to have true communion with the author of the universe? What is that smoke in your vision? Like I said, please feel free to share parts of your vision or all of your vision in the comments section below, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's fine too. If you just want to share it with Patchwork community members, you can, and you're on our email list, you can do that certainly. Or you can just have it be your own spiritual exercise, and that's perfectly fine too. However you use it, I hope this exercise in apocalyptic, and remember, apocalypse does not mean some earth-shaking, end-of-the-world event. Apocalypse in the Greek means an unveiling, an uncovering, a revealing of God's truth and God's love in the world. And so I hope that this apocalyptic vision, in the true sense of apocalypse, has not only helped you understand the book of Revelation a little more deeply, but that it has helped draw you closer to the God of justice and the God of eternal love. Amen. So we come to a time of sharing the prayers of the people. If you are on the email list, then you got Amy's email on Thursday, and I'll list those prayer concerns to lift up briefly here. One is our Arts and Smarts summer programming. We're still working on that, working on how to do Art Garden. And that, I believe, starts next week. Amy might correct me in the comments section if I'm wrong about that. But I believe that our Art Garden programming starts this coming week, and we'll be doing things in a very modified fashion. It's because of COVID-19, to keep our kids and their families safe, and our staff and our volunteers as well. So please, prayers for all of them, for our kids, for their families, for our staff and our volunteers, for Amy and me, as we're trying to coordinate things with this organization that is suddenly having to do things in a very different way than we're used to doing them. So please keep us all in your prayers for summer programming for the kids. Continued prayers for Anelia as she recovers from surgery. Obviously, continued prayers for our nation as we deal with the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racism. And as we pray for the protesters, that they remain healthy while they are trying to effect change that will save lives and create a better society, a more just society. And that is very much, I think, one of those bowls that I was talking about. It's one of those bowls of the work of God's justice. And there are angels in golden shoes and golden masks carrying golden signs that are creating change in our society. And I think that is definitely something that we need to keep in prayer. If there are other prayers to lift up, again, please go ahead and put them in the comments section. And I'll wait just a moment because I know there's a little bit of a delay here. Will you join me in prayer? God of tabernacles and smoke, God of angels and living creatures, God of strange visions and everyday love. We ask that you make your presence known to us. We ask that you invite us, beckon us to join the work of your justice in the world. Let us become participants in that work. Give us strength and courage to do that work. God, we lift up those that we have named in prayer. We lift up our Arts and Smarts programming, the children and families that we serve, our staff and volunteers, our leadership, that the programming may be creative and fun and productive, and may also further your work in the world. We ask prayers of healing for Nelia as she recovers. We ask prayers for all of those who are suffering, whether from the coronavirus or other illnesses. May your healing power flow through body and mind and spirit, so that all of us who are broken in one way or another may be healed and made whole by your shalom. God, help our nation and our globe as we struggle with institutional injustice, especially racism. Help us to root out racism at all levels, from the macro levels of international relations all the way into the gray cells of our minds and the unconscious racism that is in so many of our brains. Help us to fight at all levels for justice and equity, for a peace that is a true peace. Help us to create budgets that reflect priorities that are in line with your love and mercy and justice. Calls for things like to defund the police, to reroute that money to social work and community services, to deal with the roots of the problems rather than try to foist them on servants like police officers and teachers. Help us to create right relationship in society, systems that feed human flourishing and do not commodify and take advantage of the poor and the marginalized. God, all of these prayers we lift up to you in your holy name. We ask that you hear us. We ask that you respond in your own way. Amen. And I've noticed that, so if you do look at the comments section, Amy has put in that yes, the summer programming for Arts and Smarts starts this week. Families can sign up for the virtual lessons by emailing, and it gives the email address there in the comments. So if you know someone or are someone who would like to sign up a child for the Arts and Smarts summer programming, please go ahead and do that. We now come to a time for sharing gifts, and of course, there are gifts that are financial gifts that help Patchwork continue its work and ministry here in the neighborhood, in the community. But there are also gifts that maybe you have received that you would like to share with the rest of us so that we can enjoy them and celebrate with you and rejoice with you in your gift. So please feel free to share your gifts in the comments section below. We've had gifts of beautiful weather, especially today. It's been gorgeous. We've had gifts of all kinds. So please share them with each other. All right. I don't see any yet, but as they come up, please feel free to enjoy those with each other. We come to a time for celebrating the meal together, the communion meal, and I need to show off Darlene's amazing bread here. So, yeah. This is an exquisitely crafted boule of bread. So in this vision, when John of Patmos, the visionary of the book of Revelation, when he sees this vision of these 7 golden bowls, this wouldn't be like a cereal bowl or a soup bowl that we know of. It would have been a ceremonial bowl. And the ceremonial bowls were wide and shallow. So it would have been this wide, shallow bowl that would have been used for special rituals in the temple. Now, at the Last Supper, it was probably also a wide, shallow bowl, a wide, shallow communal bowl, because Jesus would say, dip, all of you who are dipping in this bowl, everybody would dip in the communal bowl. And I think that reminds us that there is this connection between the holy, between being in community, which is a holy act, a holy thing, a holy state, and the work of justice, which is both holy and requires community. And so the connection of these bowls to doing the work of justice and creating community and connecting us with God in a holy way, I think is extremely appropriate for our celebration of communion, of the Lord's Supper. And so whatever elements you have with you, whether your bowl is shallow or deep or wide or narrow, just imagine that we are all dipping in the same wide bowl, that we are dipping into a ritual that is holy, that is communal, that is justice-oriented. Because it was on the night when he was betrayed, Jesus took the loaf of bread and he gave thanks for it, and he blessed it, and he broke it, and he told his disciples to take and eat. Do this in remembrance of me. And after supper, in like manner, he took the cup, and he said, drink of this cup, all of you, for poured out in this cup is the new covenant in my blood, and I will not drink of the fruit of the vine with you again until we drink it new, in God's new earth, under God's new heaven. Therefore, I invite you, with whatever elements you have, to take a piece of bread or whatever, and dip it in your cup of whatever you have, and know that we are all dipping together. Even though we are physically apart, spiritually and ritually, we are dipping in the same cup, and we are eating together. Looking at the comments section, it looks like Nils is saying that his knee keeps getting better, so prayers of thanks and gift for Nils' knee and continued healing and improvement for that. That's wonderful. That's the only one I see at the moment. Like I said, there's a bit of a lag here, but I do see that. So we rejoice with Nils for his knee. And now we come to a time for sharing announcements, which of course you can share in the comments section. The only announcement of which I am aware is that we will be having a Patchwork worship community meeting by Zoom about 10 minutes after I turn off the camera. So it's now almost 6:10. Let's say we'll meet around 6:20-ish, maybe a minute or two early if everybody's there. But we'll have another Patchwork worship community meeting via Zoom. So all of the Patchwork worship community members should have gotten the invitation for that already. Seeing no other announcements. I think that does it. Well, thank you for joining us in this virtual worship time and space, and thank you for coming along with us. Please remember to find ways to connect with each other and support each other, because loneliness is a real issue. I know I've felt it, even though I get to have someone that I'm at home with all the time. It's important to feel connected to people, to our friends and our family, even if it's our found family, like here at Patchwork. And so please remember to take care of yourselves and each other, and let the people of God say, Amen.